Hey guys, thanks for tuning in and checking out my tutorial series here, creating your very first game. This video is, its intention is to just run you quickly through a few things about Game Maker that you probably haven't seen if you just downloaded it. If you've already downloaded it, you've made a few things already. Some of this might just be recycled stuff you've heard, but I'm just going to show you a few things, so I'd ask that you don't do what I'm doing right here. I'm just, for the purpose of showing you, I'm going to make a new game and just kind of go over a few things about Game Maker. And then after this preface, you will be able to watch episode 1, which is, it starts right from opening Game Maker, making a new game. Again, I'm just going to show you a few things before you get to that point, just in case you just downloaded it. So new game. So I'm going to go over, most importantly, the asset browser on the right side of the screen. We use it a lot. And I'm just going to talk about some of the more important folders, the most used folders. So let me just find one to start. So this is probably the biggest one, the objects. When you think of an object, it is pretty much everything in the game, from your player to the enemies you walk into, certain objects you interact with, like trees, grass, rocks. It holds the instructions for how the game is played. So I'm going to create an object here just to show you. And again, I'm going to go over how to do all this, episodes 1 through 10 there. So we've created an object, and over here you can see it has an image. The sprite will be the image that is built into it. So if it was a player, you'd put on your nice player sprite. And underneath of that is the collision mask. The collision mask is essentially the boundaries of where your player interacts with the objects around it. So you can set that to a custom sprite, or leave it as the same as the sprite that the object is using. Like if you're getting shot by a bullet, that boundary is where you'll interact with that bullet. And we go into that a little bit in the tutorial there. Visible just means that the player, if I was playing the game, I would be able to see the object. If you had, say, an object in the background that was controlling through code everything around it, you could set that to be not visible, because it's not necessary to have the player see all that. The solid checkbox basically just tells Game Maker to handle collisions in a certain way. And I don't tend to use it because you can code most of the collisions the way you want them to happen. So I tend to avoid that because it uses a bit of background things happening through Game Maker. The persistent checkbox, that means that this object will persist room through room. It just keeps persisting. So normally when you exit a room, all the objects within that room are destroyed. And then if you go revisit that room, say level 1, you've went to level 2, you're going back to level 1 now, everything will restart as it was. With persistent objects, that object will carry into the next room. And it's just something that I don't use a lot. Again, a lot of background code and data being stored between rooms. There's ways to code it where you can kind of save that yourself. So I avoid that personally, but it does have its uses. Uses physics, that basically just lets it use Game Maker's physics engine, which has a lot of great uses. If you're going to make an asteroid game, maybe you want them to bounce precisely. If you're using bullets that deflect, it's got lots of uses. This specific tutorial, we don't use that. But it does have its uses, so if you do have any questions, by all means feel free to ask, or if there's a tutorial about certain aspects of that you want to see, by all means let me know. The event tab is basically, it is looking for an event to occur, And when that event occurs, it's going to run code depending on what the event is. So if we add an event, let's say the key down left. So it's looking to see if the left arrow key was pressed, and then it's going to run some code. Now, personally, I avoid those key pressed events unless it's a really basic object. What we can do normally is use the step event. And the step event is probably the most important event you'll use between the create and the draw event. The step event runs every frame of the game. So if your game is 60 frames per second, it's going to run 60 times every second. So I could, instead of running the key pressed event, I could say if keyboard check pressed, and then the key, for example, VK left, which is virtual key left. So rather than relying on that specific event to run that, I can use that in the step event. But we definitely go over all of that when getting the controls of our player for the game. So that's the events. So it's looking for an event to occur and then running the code based on which event it was. The parent tab, it lets you parent objects. So I'll use the example, let's say our player is a dog, and it's looking for animals, but we have different kinds of animals: cats, rabbits, and mice. The parent object lets us encompass those cats, rabbits, and mice in one separate group, so we can call it animals. So when we tell the dog to look for an animal, or we're looking for the nearest animal, it's looking for one within the group, and we don't have to say look for the nearest cat, look for the nearest rabbit, look for the nearest mouse, and figure out which is closer. We can just say look for the nearest animal, and it will look within that group to decide which was closer. So parenting is really powerful, and we do go over a little bit of that through the tutorial there. The next tab here is physics, and that works with the physics engine. You can set all sorts of properties to tell it to behave, and I don't use any of that throughout the tutorial, so I won't go over that too much. But again, if you have any questions, let me know. Variable definitions, that's just really defining variables when the object is created. So if I wanted to say we have 10 coins, I could say coins, which is a variable, and a variable is a container to hold data. Coins, we can set the value to 10, and there we go. Now our player has 10 coins. Alternatively, and what we would normally do is go to the create event, add an event, create. So when this object is created in the room, so when the room starts up, the object is created at that instant. This event will run one time, and that's it. So I could say coins equals 10, and that has the same effect, except now it's coded and it's in one place, and I personally prefer it that way. So that is the object, the basics of an object. The next biggest thing we would look at is the rooms. So in the asset browser, go to your rooms. We've got room 1, that's always your first room that's created. This is what the player sees. If we had some buttons here, if we had your player walking around, we could set walls around the border of it. That's just what the player is going to see. And then if we hit the play button right now, it would actually just run a black room. Actually, it might take a second to compile since it's the first time we're running it. But it should start up a room that is 1366 by 768 wide and long. I'm sorry, width and height. And it has nothing going on, so it's just a black room. We can change the size in the bottom left here to whatever you want. Because it's the first room being run, it will run, it actually sets the game's aspect ratio, or the game's size. So I always set it to something 16:9, unless I was making something really specific, like for an old monitor or for say a Game Boy aspect ratio. But 1280 by 720 will let you scale it up to 1920 by 1080p, or right down to a small pixel arcane, and we go over that in the tutorial. Scripts, we do a little bit of that, so I'll get out of that room there. The scripts folder, we do a bit of that. A script is a container that would hold functions. So it's really useful for things that you'll be doing often. So if I was to be running a piece of code that checked how many apples we had and then displayed an effect based on how many apples we had, I could create a line of code within a script. Let's open one up while we have it here. So I could run a script here, create a function that checks for how many apples we've got, and then reference that later in the code. And we go over that within the tutorial a bit, but I don't want to get too in depth right now. The next folder you would look at would be the sounds. That would hold sound data, sounds, background music, effects like that. And we go over that when we create buttons. We add button sounds to that. Sprites, that's probably the second biggest folder next to objects that we'd be looking at. So if we right click it, we can create one. And again, I don't expect you to be doing this right now, just kind of watching me as I go. We'll create a sprite. And a sprite is basically just a picture. So this sprite has a name, and we would say S player, and that would denote that is the sprite for the player. When I click the size here, that would let me make the size of the sprite, and we can either scale it from 16 to say 32, or we can change the whole canvas itself and say we want a weird size like 32 wide by 48 high, and it lets us set the size that way. Then we could, there's a few settings that we can do here to tile it or play with the texture pages. We don't go into that, and that's kind of advanced stuff that we don't really need to use now. Collision mask, we're able to set the actual, like I was telling you in the objects, the bounding box of it. So we could set it to automatically be a rectangle, which would cover every pixel in it, or maybe we want it to be a circle that covers the pixels. We can also manually set it, which we do a lot of in our tutorial here. We could set it to be a circle, and that's really the bounding box, the collision mask there. And if we go to edit image at the top, it actually lets us draw on a canvas, and there's a lot of brushes up here in the top right that we can use, rectangles, circles. There's flipping tools that let us draw circles and text, and it's really really useful. It's even got layers now, so you could set a background layer. You could draw your player, you could draw his arms on different layers. It's kind of useful that way. So we go a little bit into depth for that there. You've got your colors here, which lets you do manual precise color picking. But that really is it. So I'm going to exit out of that sprite, go to my workspace. Tile sets we don't get into, and timelines we don't get into. And there's a lot of different stuff you can do, but that's the bulk of it. So with that, I'll leave you. Go ahead and watch episode 1, where we're going to create your first game file and hopefully learn how to make a game. If you have any questions, by all means leave a comment, leave a like if you watch this, and good luck making your new first game. Thanks.